All right, clock hit 102. Let's get started. So thank you everyone for joining today's webinar. It's one in our series that we've been running since early April. We'll be running this webinar series through the middle of October, I believe. Today's topic, mastering cloud security, best practices, improvement strategies. So this was one of a topic that came to us from several customers as well as individuals that, or not individuals, but corporations that have actually been attending the webinars asking us to tackle this subject, and hope that we put together something that you'll be able to take with you as actionable steps. On the call today, Oscar, if you can go to the next page. Myself, I just want to introduce myself. My name's Chris Hule. I'm the VP of Sales and Strategy for CyberSecOp, and Oscar Jones is one of our CISOs, but also heads up our CISO group. And we'll be both sharing in the conversation, and it's one, again, I think that you'll be really excited about. Cloud, it's really one of those things that's taken off significantly. I think that's nothing that any of you on the call don't know. And just like anything else, we think it's kind of found its footing, right? If you go back 2-3 years ago, cloud was a word and no one knew what it meant. And right now we have organizations that use everything from credit card sized clouds to full implementations in the cloud, and if not, something in the middle with a hybrid environment. And when you sit down and look at that, I think some of the initial thoughts from a security perspective is, if I sign up for cloud, I'm basically turning over the risk to the cloud provider, whoever that is, whether that's AWS, Google, Microsoft, or someone, mid-size or smaller than that. And to some degree that is true, but to a larger extent, it is overall your responsibility to make sure that those organizations are maintaining the standards that you are setting for your own. So when you get into looking at some of the challenges that you have that were faced from a critical, from a cloud perspective, everything you see on here as far as, the migration of functions, the security challenges, the shared responsibility, the basic phenomenon here that we're having to deal with is, it is not just a turn over those responsibilities. It is each organization's responsibility to understand how you're working in probably a hybrid environment, but also maintaining and monitoring what's actually taking place. Now, getting to the application, accessing the application, that's something else we're going to cover in this discussion. Oscar, next slide. So this threat landscape that Oscar's put together, and Oscar, why don't you take this particular slide and then I'll kind of jump in on it.
Yeah. So if you think about the cloud security landscape, right? How do you understand it? What's the building block of building a robust defense? Most of the individuals on this call have some type of cloud environment, but if you think about the current threat landscape, multi-layered, right? It's, top threats are no longer focused on cloud providers, because they know that it's going to be a lot more difficult to get to those. So they care about misconfigurations, identity and access management weaknesses, insecure APIs, and insecure development. But really, what's the compliance challenge, right? It's about the complexity of how many cloud systems do you have? Do you have AWS, Azure, Google? When you have that many, and then you have multiple frameworks, it kind of, it helps you, but it hurts you, because now you got to monitor three. I have a customer who has all three, and they have different parts and pieces of their environment, but it's really, that's where a lot of their time and effort is spent. They're looking at the auditing logging process. They're looking at the evolving regulations and what to do next, and also data sovereignty. So it's really about, how do you set it up initially? How do you work through any pain points? And how does it all come together at the end of the day?
And those organizations that do have multiple clouds, in one way, they're looking at it like, I'm distributing my risk. And the other way, you're also expanding your risk, right? What you do for one, you have to do for many. So now you're monitoring and engaging with 3 different platforms, not just one that you can kind of focus on.
Absolutely. So this goes in a little bit more in depth, misconfiguration and inadequate change control, simple errors, leaving the storage buckets publicly accessible. And this happens every single day. We see it on a consistent basis. And, data breach was the direct result of misconfigured AWS S3 buckets and hard-coded access keys. A lot of times, you may have someone on the team who's trying to put this together, but they're reading as they go. And even when you have somebody who's certified, they're not going to know all the pieces and parts unless they are working on becoming an expert. So then if you think about identity and access management weaknesses, The 2024 Microsoft breach was initiated through a password spray attack on an account lacking MFA. And you may think, oh, everybody's using MFA, but unless it's turned on, it's not going to work. And a lot of companies don't know how to actually implement that in a seamless process so that it doesn't affect the individuals who are utilizing. So then if you think about the insecure interfaces and APIs, attackers exploit vulnerabilities in the API to gain unauthorized access to cloud resources, all of your data points, all of the information that you're trying to save, and make sure that you protect your reputations. That is what they look for. They want to just find one way to get in so that they can kind of open the door for themselves and other team members for the threat actor side. And then if you look at the insecure software development breach where an access key was found in the website's code, it still happens because someone has hard coded it and they may have been testing, but then they forgot about it over a period of time. And these threats are not theoretical. These have happened and they still happen every single day, and they will continue until people get really comfortable with the tools that they're utilizing. Threats to critical infrastructure, ERP systems targeted for sensitive financial and operational data, vulnerability in the web components, outdated software, and inadequate data encryption. Then storage and backups. And we've been talking about this for a few months about how important are your backups. If a ransomware attack happens and they've encoded and basically tied up all of your environments, what do you do next? Your backups aren't consistent. They may be, weeks or months between being able to actually look at that data point. And 89% of organizations report backup repositories were targeted. Misconfigured storage buckets, access token abuse, and then productivity tools. 2024 overlooked service tokens, compromised credentials, insecure third-party integrations. But that comes back to what we do as leaders, because if I tell you exactly what to do, how to keep yourself safe, and you don't follow those rules, then it becomes a more difficult conversation. But we're going to give you the step-by-step process of why you should do that, why it's important, and why it is central to you doing it the right way. You got to be consistent. That's really the key. And some of the common compliance difficulties, and Chris and I both stated multi-cloud complexity. It could be a great thing or it could be a horrible thing. I've looked at all three of these tools. I've used these tools for years. Some are better than others. I mean, AWS is pretty good as far as, the making your multi-cloud complexity a little bit easier. Google Cloud does not make it as easy, but Azure is doing a great job of it. But the more you have to do, the bigger the chance that you're most likely to make a mistake or leave off a setting that you should have been doing in the first place. So managing multiple frameworks, organizations often must comply with several overlapping and sometimes conflicting regulatory frameworks. We've seen this. One may require you to have a backup system and your audit and logging turned off. Another one may not even mention it at all. So it's really about knowing what you can do what's best for your environment. That keeps you out of trouble, which is the key. Evolving regulatory landscapes. Compliance is never a one-time task. We like to look at it as a marathon, not a sprint. You're running the sprint, everybody's running at the same speed or trying to beat each other. Whereas if you take your time, step by step, it makes your life a lot easier going forward. And then data sovereignty. Data is subject to the laws of the country where it is stored, processed, or creating complexity for global organizations. We see this as much. We see this quite often, European standards versus our standards. It's always going to be an interesting story to tell. But you got to know, you can't pull data out of the EU because of the privacy laws. Here we have CCPA, NYDFS, but because we have so many disjointed states, they're all creating their own laws as far as how data should be treated. So that always makes it an adventure. And sometimes it can be fun, but most of the time it just gives you a headache.
So
So
we tried to do coming into these next 10 slides, and we're going to send this whole presentation out plus the recording because I don't know that we'll get everything stuffed into a 30-minute window. But what we're trying to do is give you some functional takeaways in these next 10 slides that would be the perspective of a CIO, a CTO, and a CISO. So these are slightly more prescriptive rather than theoretical, but there really should be, everything should really start out with an assessment to see exactly where your cloud environment is, what controls are in place, what governance is kind of in place. So if you kind of park that as a true necessity, what we're going to really cover going forward is how we can best prescribe things that should be considered or things you should be proud of that are already in place when you start looking at securing your cloud environment. So the first one here is really a foundational principle, and clearly, which is why we actually stated it on here. There has to be an alignment. This is, as we've kind of described, cloud can be the best thing or the worst thing, right? It can't be that it's just a fire and forget. It's somebody else's responsibility. So now the coordination of all three, governing individuals, the CIO from a hierarchy perspective, but the CTO on a tactical basis, the CISO from a security basis, those all need to be aligned so everybody understands exactly what the capabilities are, what the responsibilities are, what the risks are, how things are supposed to function. And really, as we kind of mentioned here, the best way to sit down and actually understand that is to sit down and work on your playbooks and actually have a workshop to sit down and talk about how this functions. You're seeing organizations that might rely on proprietary and custom applications and SaaS applications that you're creating in the cloud. Well, that opens up another can of worms, but it is a differentiating factor for you. But that differentiating factor, if it's breached or locked down, could be the thing that puts you out of business at the same time. So one of the recommendations inside of this is actually alignment of your leadership, but also tabletopping what is actually in place, how it's actually going to function, and what is really the responsibilities of everybody as you go forward. Oscar, you want to take this one?
Yes. So identity and access management as the perimeter. So in the cloud, the traditional network perimeter is gone. It's still there, but it's not as prevalent as it used to be because now your cloud environment is doing all the work. So, as a CISO, you gotta, or even a network engineer, analyst, you gotta implement and enforce multi-factor. It is central to making sure that your data is protected. And, you may think, well, it's fairly decent, but it doesn't do a great job. But the way we look at it is better than not having anything. At least now we have one thing that you know and one thing that you have. So that kind of gives you two different levels of security. And, MFA has been around for a long time. And trust me, threat actors are always looking for an easier way to get around certain things. But it's really about you got to support a strategy of zero trust. I don't trust any device at all. I don't trust any user outside of myself. But it's got, when it's trusted as a default, that's when issues start to occur. Because what if I lose my phone? Or what if I lose my laptop? And the person has access to my data? Guess what? They can do anything that they want, regardless of whether they're inside or outside of the network. And this is get the consideration of enterprise browser, MFA, or SSO. Extremely important that you think about the premise of why those are extremely, they've been around for so long, but it prevents a threat actor from just walking in the front door. At least now they got to figure out a different way to get in.
Yeah, and then
And
on the go back one slide, and on the enterprise browser piece, when you get to the zero trust component, the part of the reason we're suggesting that you take a look at that is while multi-factor and single sign-on are restrictive and an additional step to make sure that the right person's getting in, once they're in, if you don't have controls on what someone has access to do or see or copy or paste, how else can you really control mishaps from happening or intentional bad behavior? So when you look at the fact that MFA and single sign-on is your key to get in, your enterprise browser is the thing that's going to actually be the enforcement of what you can or cannot do based on your role or your proximity of being on corporate campus or off corporate campus or on your own device or on your kid's device, right? That's where you're getting into that much deeper level of observation and enforcement of your expectations from a technology perspective, from a business perspective, and from a culture perspective. When you roll into the policy enforcement, right, it's definitely an area where I could have put, and we could have put enterprise browsing into this aspect as well. But when you look at how these tools and how you actually are configuring the controls of what actually takes place, if in fact someone's in, now having the automation aspect from a compliance perspective will also either expedite the good behavior or expedite the bad behavior. So making sure that the infrastructure is secured properly, you have the proper tools in place. We've suggested two of them in there. AWS does a really nice job on the cloud formation component for their own environment. But like we said, there are organizations that have multi-cloud. But this aspect of security code enforcement or policy enforcement is one of the most important aspects as you go through. And we might say it's one of the most important aspects on each one of these 10 because they are, which is why we've got them on the list. Oscar, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to this one.
No, I think you covered it perfectly. I think that's a great job. Continuous cloud security posture management. Cloud environments are in a constant state of flux, and they always will be. And I think they have to. It's about continuous visibility into your cloud environment, detecting misconfigurations. It's really about how well do you audit that environment as well. You gotta think about if you just buy your car off the lot and you never take it into the shop, you don't know what's going on under the hood until you take a look. Same concept with cloud environments. You got to make sure that if there's a misconfiguration, if there's a policy violation, what do? Compliance drifts in real time. It's a critical investment for all three leaders to ensure that standard security is maintained at all times. So you want to consider tools such as CrowdStrike, Tenable, or Singularity. So it's really about making sure that not only is it set up correctly, but it's maintained properly. That's really the most important piece that we want you to take away from this. Chris, did you want to add anything to this, sir?
Perfect.
Okay. Data-centric security. So the primary goal is to protect your data, but not only your data, your customers' data, as well as your internal employees. A lot of times we forget that employees really make the business run, but clients pay us to do what we do. So when that stops becoming a focal point, then that's when data becomes in flux, and you don't want to, have a situation where sensitive data is all in the cloud, but you don't know where it's located, you don't know who has access to it, and you want to make sure it's properly classified and encrypted at both rest and in transit. And a lot of people think, oh well, it's in rest, it's encrypted, or it's in transit and it's encrypted. You need to do both, because if you don't, I can guarantee you almost with a unfettered shadow of a doubt that a threat actor will look at that and say, okay, I know where I can get in. And they will start kind of knocking at the door to see where the weak controls are. But this includes native cloud encryption services and implementing robust data and DLP policies.
One of the main things we do when we perform security assessments for our clients as well as new customers is we sit down and kind of take a very high level but deep look into the ability of the organization's current ability to protect themselves from attack and their ability to recover. This data-centric security, this ability to recover, this ability to have encrypted backups is key in that space. We have an incident response business unit within inside our organization that deals with any kind of breach, forensic work, even negotiation with threat actors. And we had in the last 6 months a customer that came in on a Sunday, typically always happens on a weekend when no one's watching the store, that when they were breached, we had conversations with them. We found out they did have backups. They were encrypted at flight arrest. They did not protect their administrative rights. So the threat actor got in, they noticed they couldn't get to the jewels, so they basically made a copy and erased them. So at this point, it was a matter of you did everything except the front end in protecting who has access back to one of our other points before on administrative rights. So they went in and just erased everything. So the only way to come back from that was to pay the threat actor to get their own data back because they missed a step, which is why some of these are multi-layer or overlaying from a VIN perspective.
Vulnerability and patch management. And we all know why this is extremely important. If you don't, upload or update your patches, we know what can happen. It's a situation where sometimes you get so busy and you don't have automated patching turned on, and now you're 2 to 3 iterations behind. And now, because that hasn't been updated, threat actors know it because they can look at the code and say, okay, they're 2 to 3 versions behind on doing any updating. Hey, here's my welcome mat. I can come in and take anything that I want. I can come in and out and not leave a trail to be followed. But this includes both the base images used for deployments and the running instances. And automation is key to make sure you manage the scale of the cloud. Because if you're not doing this consistently, then someone is always watching the door, just like, oh, he's out now. Let me go in and get everything that I need, and then they disappear again. And the situation, if you want to consider to help you, that's going to be consistent, would be an enterprise browser, cloud assessments, and vulnerability testing. And you want to do this very, I would say, consistently, because otherwise, when you stop doing that, when if you think about and I'm probably going to say this wrong, the chicken and the wolf, and the wolf is always looking for the guard dog to walk away. So think about this as being your guard dog, and the wolf is looking that because you left the door open, he can go and do whatever he wants to do. So it's really about protecting yourself and protecting the data of the clients and the internal employees as well. Chris, did you want to
I
add
think
anything?
yeah, I think from a good anecdote or an acknowledgement of the patch management and the importance of it, I think patching in general is one of those things that IT ends up getting pushed and it doesn't really happen on the clock like it should. It just other priorities end up pushing things aside. That opens up risks. I chase my own kids down to make sure that they do their patching on their iPhones as it comes out, right? But realistically, when you look at what the cyber insurance industry is recommending, and eventually will be enforcing probably in the next year or so, they look at everything as actuaries. That's what they are, but they also look at it with zero empathy. So when you sit down and look at the list of things that they're requiring now for you to have cyber insurance or to renew your cyber insurance or to at least have a competitive rate, it's multi-factor, it's single sign-on, and it is patching every 2 weeks. It isn't every month. It isn't when you get to it. It's every 2 weeks. So what they would rather have see is an organization that's patching, even though it might be buggy, to be up to the latest, and then maybe there'll be a .1 on top of the patch that was done. But they are really focusing on making sure the environments are as safe as possible. And an automated patch management system where you can buy that either as a service or enforce your organization to do that is really going to be a requirement as opposed to something we do from an IT perspective. And the things that we listed in there are going to either help you identify those issues or combat those issues in addition to actually having a patch management system. And we actually can, our organization can supply that as well.
Centralized logging and monitoring, you can't secure what you can't see. CIOs and CISOs, we have regular conversations about, what is it that we're not protecting? What are we not looking at that we should be taking a viewpoint in? You're looking at your centralized SIEM platform. This provides a single pane of glass for threat detection and incident response across all cloud environments. If you can't see it, again, how do you protect it? And it's almost an impossibility. So you want to consider a managed or co-managed SOC and SIEM, because that is what you have to consistently do. If I don't know about it, then I'm probably not protecting about it. I'm not protecting it. I'm not looking at it on a consistent basis. And because of that, it's actually kind of floating out there in the wind. And we want to make sure that that is minimized as much as we possibly can. Chris, do you want to add anything, sir?
No, I mean, I think that's a very central point. There are, one of the things that we do, we offer a SOC service, managed or co-managed. One of the things that we pride ourselves on is the fact that we can absorb any information as opposed to having to make a wholesale change over to something that we just like. So having that ability to sit down and actually monitor the environment, triangulate all of that data, look and do threat hunting is going to be an imperative aspect to sit down and protect yourselves over time. Having a comprehensive incident response plan is also key. When you get back to the one of the points I made, which is at the highest level, it's a matter of how capable you are to protect and how capable you are to recover. In this recovery mode, you do need to sit down and actually test your plan with your cloud provider, whether that's AWS, Microsoft, Google, or some other. So to sit down and actually have a proactive program, have a workshop it, have your cyber insurance in place in case all of that falls apart. Those are necessary pieces to sit down and make sure that there is a plan in action if in fact there's any compromise that might happen to the environment, whether it's an oversight or something that's a day zero type of situation.
Right size resource governance. CIOs are concerned with cost and efficiency. So we know that, AWS is a very expensive product. And, you can pay all the money you want to for a product, but if you're not making that product secure, then it doesn't matter. You're spending a lot of money, but just because you're doing that does not necessarily mean that you're safe. So you always got to make sure that no matter what kind of tool you have in your environment, and no matter how it's being managed, if it's internal or externally, you still got to go back and check just to make sure that everything is running the proper way. It's about limiting the types of services that can be used, and using resource tagging helps control crowd sprawl. And this not only manages cost, but also reduces the attack surface. Extremely important. Consider having an attack surface scan or an enterprise browser. Anything you want to add, sir?
Yeah, on the attack surface scanning, if the larger your organization gets, the more distributed the decisions are, and cloud being something that could be credit card size or massive, they pop up in more frequently than you would think in an on-prem and controlled environment. So one of the things that we're seeing is organizations doing these attack surface scans and essentially getting themselves a FICO score. So if they sat down and did it on a monthly basis or quarterly basis, they will see how their scores are changing from the outside. And while it's also covering the cloud, it's covering the entire environment from any accessibility that might come in off their web or any place else. It covers their SaaS applications, which cloud is one of those. So having the ability to sit down and actually monitor independently on a monthly or quarterly or at least a semi-annual basis to kind of see what is my FICO score and am I more exposed than I was before, and where would that be, to help me understand that rather than finding out after the fact, is a key recommendation.
Developer security training and culture. Developers are building in the cloud, so they must be part of the solution. I think a lot of times we work with developers and we don't start talking about or having a conversation about security until it's too late. We need to be at the forefront of that conversation to make sure that everyone understands, listen, it has to be a security-centric environment. It has to have security-centric controls. And if you don't start off on the right foot, you're always going to start, forgetting things and leaving things that are not going to be done or completed in a timely manner. So you just want to make sure you're partnering with the CTO to implement the shift left security culture, and make sure that developers are trained on secure coding practices. OWASP has been around for years and it's not going anywhere. Utilize that to your advantage. Make sure that you're listening to the right information and the right data points to ensure that everything has been controlled and you're thinking about security constantly. Because if you don't, that is when you become susceptible to issues and threat actors getting into your environment. So you want to consider a SecDevOps environment, application code reviews, and testing, which also includes CI/CD.
One of the things I think we have evangelized, and we have customers that are doing that, for those that actually have custom apps, that is the differentiator for their organization. Those development environments, we've flipped the notion of security first. So that's why you're seeing this as SecDevOps rather than SecOps. So in a couple cases, we've had a completely separate CTO, a completely separate monitoring of that environment from the production environment to make sure that what's being done in this sandbox environment, and as it kind of elevates it up to release, is as secure as possible, goes through all the application code reviews so that there is no exposure or tainting of taking place of their production environment, with logical fallbacks if in fact something were to happen, which I know that's common in practice, but now you're looking at it from a security perspective, not just a code or functional perspective.
I agree 100%. Chris, we are at the bottom of the hour.
Yep.
So I want to make sure that everyone, enjoyed the conversation. We also are going to make sure that we send out a copy of this to everyone on the call today.
We have additional slides here to kind of close everything out. We're sorry we're slightly more long-winded. We want to respect everybody's time, but thank you so much. And I will put my contact information in the follow-up email. So if you'd like to dig in a little deeper or have us kind of complete the last 2 or 3 slides, happy to do that for you on a one-on-one basis. Thank you all for joining, and we look forward to you joining our next webinar in the future.
Thanks, everyone.